Hi, I'm Scott Wolf, and I'm going to share stories with you about Harriet Burns. This is Harriet working on the Listen to the Land attraction for Epcot, but her history with Disney goes as early as Sleeping Beauty Castle with Disneyland. I first met Harriet through my friend Alice Davis. I was writing an article about Pirates of the Caribbean, and Alice did all the costumes for that attraction, and she told me, "You've got to talk to Harriet," and she put me in touch with her. I always had a hard time knowing exactly what Harriet did for Disney, and it's really just because she did so much. Well, she was hired to paint sets and do props for the Mickey Mouse Club TV series in the 1950s. And she was placed in a warehouse at the back of the studio where she did her work alongside Fred Jerger and Wathel Rogers. Well, if she was hired to work on the Mickey Mouse Club, how is it that she ended up working on Disneyland stuff? I want to play some audio for you. This is an excerpt from a phone conversation I had, and she explains that.
I did the Musketeer sets and props, and I would get the schedule of what was going to be shooting, what the theme of that daily show was. And they say, like, Tuesday we'll do this and Thursday this. Sometimes then that they would change it the last minute. No, we're going to do Thursdays on Monday. And so then that would really be a crunch. And then Fred and Wathel would help me, which was great. I mean, everybody was so cooperative. And then when Fred was in a bind, we've got to have the castle done by so-and-so for a meeting. Well, then I'd help Fred. And see, Wathel helped Fred. So we all worked together, the three of us. And that's why we became the first Imagineers, the three of us. But we didn't know it.
Harriet mentioned that she worked on the castle with Fred. Together they did the scale models of the castle. It started with a small scale model, and then they would do bigger and bigger scale models, each with more detail. Fred did a lot of work on the castle, and Harriet did the intricate details, like working on the eaves and the turrets and the bricks, for example. She once told me every project she worked on started with a scale model, because it really helped to envision what it would look like in 3 dimensions, and Walt could walk around and see it from different angles. On the Pirates of the Caribbean, they had the largest scale model that she ever worked on. It was 40 feet long, the inside of the attraction. And she said they could move the characters around and see what they look like in different places, which was a lot easier than waiting until you have a full-size show set. I want to show you a picture I took of one of her scale models that she worked on with Fred. And you may have seen this one. This was on display at Disney's Hollywood Studios in the Walt Disney Presents exhibit. This was done for Main Street for Disneyland before Disneyland opened. Even though the shops changed and the look changed a bit, it really gives you an idea of what it would look like when it was built. Harriet was a historical figure for women. This was the 1950s, and she was doing what was traditionally men's work. She was working with a torch solder and power tools and fiberglass, and yet working alongside the men and getting along great, telling jokes. In fact, she loved off-color humor. And you know, she always looked great. Her hair was perfect, her makeup was perfect, and she always wore beautiful scarves. These scarves belonged to Harriet. And I just love them, not just because they belong to Harriet, but to me they're a symbol. Not only can women do whatever men can do, but Harriet did it with style. I want to show you some pictures. These are screenshots from when Harriet appeared on television on some of Walt Disney's shows when he was showing off Disneyland. For example, here she is working on the Tiki Room. She had the shell of the figure and she had the mechanics, but she had to add all the details, the feathers and the paint and all that. And for humans, she had to add human hair. Sometimes she had to add facial hair. Or in the case of that pirate that's hanging his leg over the bridge that you go under, she placed the hair in his leg one by one. And here she is again with a perfectly coordinated scarf working on the Haunted Mansion. That's the ghost that blows out the candles on the birthday cake in the ballroom scene. And again with a beautiful scarf, there she is working on Plaza Inn, the restaurant at the end of Main Street in Disneyland. This was from an episode of Walt Disney's Wonderful World of Color. It was the Disneyland 10th Anniversary Special. You know, even though Harriet did everything so well, it was a challenging time for women in the 1950s. She applied for the job at Disney, and they recognized that she had some real talent and they wanted to hire her, but they weren't sure what for. They brought her back, and that was the second time she visited the studio. Ken Peterson walked her around, and he wanted her to tell him things that she thought she might be able to do. She saw some men working on some plaster casts of the hippos for the Jungle Cruise, and she said, "I could do that." And he said, "Women aren't allowed to do that." Can you imagine? Women, she had the talent, and women weren't allowed? That's crazy. That's the 1950s. And it wasn't Walt's policy. This was the policy of the model union. Walt didn't care. If Walt thought you could do something good, he'd have you do it. Didn't care if you were a man or a woman, he looked at talent. And he didn't care if you're working on a TV show or in Disneyland or whatever. If he knew you had the talent for any of his projects, he would put you on that. And Harriet worked on so much. I loved talking to her. When I would call Harriet, the first thing she would say is, "How are your boys?" Because I have 2 sons. And I would tell her all about the boys. One time I told her, "Oh, we just watched the Disney movie Babes in Toyland for the first time." And she said, "I did so much work on that." It was like whatever I mentioned, she worked on. She worked on the sets and on the props. And here she is behind Walt on TV, working on some of the toys for the movie. And in all the close-up shots of the Mother Goose puppet, it was actually Harriet's hand in there operating it. I remember her telling me about working on some hats for live horses. It was the Disneyland Easter parade, and she had to make Easter bonnets for the horses that were in the parade. And then she worked on the Mary Poppins movie. In the song Spoonful of Sugar, where there's a robin feathering his nest, she created the robins that you see in the movie. And there's a funny story that goes with that, but I'll save that for another video. These are some photos from her personal collection. This is the Ford Magic Skyway from the New York World's Fair. Walt did 4 attractions for the New York World's Fair in 1964, and Harriet worked on all of them. In this one, you would ride through prehistoric times in Ford cars. Parts of every attraction from that New York World's Fair made it to Disneyland. With the Ford Magic Skyway, it's the dinosaurs and pterodactyls and the triceratops that you see from the Disneyland Railroad. And this is one of my favorites, the Carousel of Progress, when it was at Disneyland. This was another attraction which began at the World's Fair. As always, Harriet worked on the original scale model of the attraction, and she worked on the set here. It was the final scene. It had to be modern times. So she had to always update the props and the Christmas tree to keep everything modern every year. And she made the cat next to the lady there. And the lady, you know, it wasn't even just painting, adding the hair and everything, but she had to create skin. She actually worked with a chemist to create human skin. It was first for Abraham Lincoln, which was also at the World's Fair. I love the lady in the scene because I think Harriet put a lot of herself into it. The perfect makeup, the perfect hair. She's dressed so nicely with the matching scarf. It reminds me so much of Harriet. And this is the Journey into Imagination attraction at Epcot. You know, when I hear of Harriet, I so often hear about her Disneyland work, but she worked on Walt Disney World for many years. And one time I asked her if she ever worked on Tokyo Disneyland, and she told me that she worked on the Meet the World attraction for that park. And this is World Showcase in Epcot. I love this photo because the first time I saw it, I thought it was the real Japan Pavilion in Epcot, but it's actually a scale model. The last things that Harriet worked on for Disney were the later pavilions for World Showcase, Norway and Morocco. You know, I loved talking to her, and I loved hearing all her stories about the Disney parks and attractions she worked on and Walt himself. And I'll share a lot of those with you another time. But what I miss most about Harriet isn't the Disney stories. It's the laughs. She always made me feel so happy. So I thought to conclude this, I'd play a little excerpt from a phone conversation I once had with her where she tells me about a mishap she had at work.
I wore heels and I wore gloves. Yes, I didn't wear a hat. But then I would take off my shoes and I had some sandals there. But one day when I was pouring polyester and I had on a navy file suit, I poured polyester by accident and spilled into my lap. Oh. And so I quick grabbed some acetone to wash it off. And when I did, I dissolved my skirt. It was rayon file. I didn't even think about it. Oh. And then my slip was nylon, and so I was there with nothing on.
Wow.
And it was very funny. And Fred had an old pair of blue jeans when he signed letters and stuff, so I had to wear his blue jeans because I didn't have anything on. I dissolved my clothes. After that, I took my smock, which had long sleeves, and I used the sleeves as a tie, and I put it on my lap. I turned it around like an apron, and I looked just like Whistler's mother.